the organizers know, leave your name. So my second announcement is just a quick heads up that our February talk will also be online, because really, who wants to go out on a cold winter's night? So you can settle in with your jammies and watch our February speaker. He's an organic vegetable gardener. His name is Jonathan Brudelaine, and he's affectionately known, I'm told, as Farmer Joe. So mark your calendars for Tuesday, February the 25th at 7 o'clock. And finally, I would be really remiss if I didn't introduce you tonight to Joanne Lacroix and Claire Leduc, who have partnered to put together a great lineup of talks for this year. I've known Joanne for several years now, and she's an avid local gardener, and she's a very talented photographer. She's organized, she's detailed, she's curious, she's enthusiastic. In other words, she's a great volunteer. And Claire, I've known from Master Gardeners. She gives garden talks and writes articles about gardening. And she too, like Joanne, is a committed and great volunteer. So we're so lucky to have both of them helping out this year. So I guess on that note, it's over to you, Joanne, because I believe you're going to introduce our speaker.
Thank you very much, Julianne. I really do appreciate that. It's been a pleasure putting this program together with Claire. So welcome, everyone, to the Ottawa Horticultural Society's Learn and Grow with Us speaker series for 2025. So before I introduce our speaker this evening, I would like to address a few technical notes. Just to ensure that things are kept streamlined, you will have an opportunity to ask questions after the presentation is over. And during the presentation, feel free to type in your questions in the comments field while we're streaming this presentation to you. And they will be addressed at the end of our speaker's presentation. In order to facilitate this, you must be signed in to your YouTube account and logged on to your Google account as well. So, having taken care of those technical elements, I'm really delighted this evening to introduce our first speaker of this calendar year. Her name is Lana Doss, whose presentation this evening is entitled Design and Biodiversity Considerations in Your Outdoor Space. And as Lana says, she's enjoyed playing in the dirt since she was a child, and she continues to share that thrill with others. She grew up surrounded by nature and the ocean, coming from Newfoundland, which inspired her love of all things outdoors. And this has really fueled her passion to support gardeners in their desire to improve the native biodiversity in their outdoor spaces. And she has spent over 30 years of her career in a leadership role in horticulture. And as a member of Ottawa's Ritchie's Feed and Seed Green Team, Lana helps people plan their gardens, as well as hosting a wide range of seminars and workshops. And with her own company, The Fine Gardener, Lana also offers garden consultation services. So on that note, welcome to all of you. And Lana, I'll turn the presentation over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that warm introduction, Joanne. It's such a pleasure meeting with everybody tonight. I'm just going to share my screen. Oops. There we go. Yeah, as we were chatting just before the session started, it's just really nice to be able to do this from home and not have to go outside. And it's also really great to start planning our gardens at the beginning of January. So Joanne's already told you lots about me, so I will skip this here. The other thing that I'd like to mention, the other thing that I do at Ritchie's, I'm one of their native plant specialists as well. So I've been really proud of the work that we've all done to increase the awareness and begin to sell more native plants and educate other staff and customers on that note. And with my company, I also specialize in native pollinator gardens, rain gardens, and edible landscaping as well. So I'm just going to try to set my screen up a little more because I'm blocking some of the things that I need to read. So bear with me for a second. Okay. So during this talk, I put this together for the Horticultural Society. We were talking about some things that would be of interest to people, and I've already done a couple of presentations on like gardening with nature. I've done some design presentations as well. So I wanted to take both of those ideas and put them together in just one talk. So this is not specifically a presentation on only native plants, and nor is it a comprehensive design talk. And excuse my typos, I do my best editing when I go live or hit send on an email. But I talked with the general public quite a lot, and there's always recurring themes that come up. So in my presentations, I try to answer some of those common design issues, gardening dilemmas. So that's how I like to proceed with some of my talks. I'll share a couple of like my thoughts on how I approach a space to start designing. I feel like that's something that most people can use to help simplify that type of task. And I'll share just a few of the plants that are my go-to plants. I generally use plants that are tried and true, maybe check off a lot of boxes. Maybe they're native, maybe they're deer resistant, maybe they have good fall color. No divas in my garden. They have to serve check many boxes. I'll also discuss like some ornamental plants as well that I generally use, some of my go-to plants that are non-harmful ornamentals, as well as natives. So, but first I want to just chat about why it's really important for us to start looking at our spaces in a different way. I will start with a quick overview of some terminology that we'll use so that we're all on the same page, like native, non-native, and invasive. And I'll also talk about how we can begin to incorporate native plants into our outdoor spaces. And we will have time for questions and questions at the end, as Joanne mentioned. So there has been this dilemma in the gardening industry, right? And for those of you who have been gardening as long as I have or longer, you're aware that we are at a point right now of massive change. So the issue has been that for the hundreds of years that we've been ornamentally gardening, we've wanted our gardens to be pretty and organized and controlled. And garden centers have sold what's in demand. And mainly what's been in demand for decades, if not centuries, has been exotic plants. Part of the attraction of exotic plants is that nothing eats them, or very, very few critters will eat these plants. So they ended up being like furniture in our gardens, right? Sometimes no better than a plastic plant. They just stay put, they do their thing, and nothing bothers them. And there's also been the perception that wild or native gardens are messy and unruly and uncontrolled. So I'm going to just share a quote from one of Dr. Doug Tallamy's books. If you are new to learning about gardening in a more environmentally friendly way and introducing native plants into your gardens. I'm sure you've heard of Dr. Doug Tallamy. He's out of Delaware, and he's done a really great job and brought a lot of scientific knowledge to this discussion. So according to Doug, so much land is broken up by roads, buildings, lawns, parking lots, croplands, but not native plants. There's a loss of habitat for our important native wildlife, and they need these plants and trees to survive. And without these species, our whole food web will collapse. It's not a matter of if, it is a matter of when, if we don't change things. So these critters end up trying to survive on tiny fragments, which are too far away from other isolated fragments for them to reach. But according to Doug, if we all planted native trees and plants. So why native plants? So native plants are those which occur naturally in the area that they evolved over thousands of generations. They've evolved alongside the insects from that area. The insects use these plants as food, then in turn become food for wildlife. And they serve as important host plants for numerous insects. Plus, they also have a higher nutritional content than non-native plants. And it's the native plants that beetles, butterflies, moths, and many other insects that will lay their eggs on. Their eggs in turn turn into caterpillars and grubs, which feed on these plants, and then in turn will feed hatchlings for birds, for example. So if you can picture in the spring what happens, we have, I'm going to use chickadees for example. They mate, they create nests, they start to lay eggs. But before that all happens, they have to choose an area where they know that there's going to be enough food to feed their babies. So the other thing that's happening in spring as well, if you've had enough leaf litter left over, then you're going to have overwintering moths and butterflies. So they're going to come out of hibernation and their chrysalis in the spring. They're going to lay eggs. They're going to turn into caterpillars. And then, of course, the birds are going to feed those to their babies. So it's just incredible how many caterpillars are actually needed just for one nest of birds. So I'd love for you to consider how many caterpillars you think are needed just to rear a nest of chickadees. And usually there's like four to six in each nest in the spring. So you might be surprised to learn that just for one nest, they need 6,000 to 9,000 caterpillars for those chickadee babies to grow into adulthood. So now I want to cover off, but just really quickly, some of the terminology that I mentioned. So I've already talked about native plants. So what are some others that we hear a lot of talk about? So native plants are basically species that have originated somewhere other than their current location. So they've been brought from somewhere else. I already mentioned exotic plants. They're also known as alien or introduced species. And insects generally don't use non-native plants as food, and they've always been introduced by human activity. Animals and critters don't move plants and seeds around the globe. Another term that you may come across as you're going through your gardening journey is cultivars. I thought it really important to mention this and just talk a little bit, break it down a bit. So a cultivar is a variety that's been bred for certain traits. So for example, they could have been bred for flower color, foliage color, size of fruit, pest resistance, growth habit, disease resistance, longer bloom time, stronger stems. Cultivars can be derived from both non-native and native plants. Another slide here. They'll always have a second name in italics. So for example, from the previous screen, I showed you just two tags. They both have names in italics, like hydrangea, limelight. The echinacea is ruby giant. So if it's been bred by organizations, companies, growers for a certain trait from its original, then it'll always have that name in italics. Usually it's a cute little name, almost like paint colors, the same type of thing. So when breeding for a desirable trait for humans that humans enjoy, there will usually be a trait that is desirable for insects that may be lost. So for example, double blooms will change the physical structure, making it harder for an insect to access nectar or pollen. Breeding a plant for a different flower color may reduce the ability for insects to find the flower. And then we'll just move on to another category of plants that we refer to as invasive plants. And this term is sometimes used interchangeably with the word aggressive. But there's a couple of key things that make a plant or any species invasive. The first one being that it is found outside of their natural range. So if you think of it this way, it's come from somewhere else. It's invaded from a different place. So invasive species generally have a few natural predators, both insects and diseases, to keep their numbers in control. They aggressively take over and outcompete valuable native plants. They'll be spread by seeds through birds and other small animals, and wildlife generally doesn't recognize them from food as food. For example, they can't always use like the nectar, and if they can, it has a lower nutritional content compared to native plants. So just to give you a quick example of how this is happening and manifesting in our wild spaces, here's a picture that I've taken from my local woods. This is somewhere that I just walked to. It's a very urban woods space, but this is I find this along my walk. So I was really happy one day when I was walking along for the first time and I saw all these native plants, and this is such an urban woods. And then I went a little further and then I saw that there was a problem plant there as well. So this particular one, for example, is a yellow archangel, the one with the yellow flowers, silvery leaves. And in this photo, you can see that's actually taken over some native plants, it's taken over some native asters. That's a bit of a close-up of one section. But then I took another photo of a larger section of about 20 square feet. And this really shows how this is happening. So most of the green that you see in this picture, there are some of the invasive archangel plants that are popping up all over. And that was once all native plants. So you can see how there's a chain link fence, a row of houses. And this particular plant, the yellow archangel, is one that makes a great spilling plant in a lot of mixed annual hanging planters. And I would imagine what had happened was somebody had a hanging basket full of different annual plants. They thought, good intentions. I'm not going to put this in the landfill when it can just be composted in the bush. Probably threw it over the fence, not knowing that it's one of the plants that's sold in these mixed baskets that's actually winter hardy and can thrive and start to take over. So this was, like I said, about a 20 square foot size, but the whole area that was being spread by that particular invasive plant was more like 200 square feet. And chances are they came from just one or two plants. So this is generally how some of these plants are sold. So this is a annual container, many different plants, but you can see the one that's spilling over the pot is the yellow archangel. So it's just really important to dispose of our annuals properly. If they are, if they're mixed, especially like this, and there's quite a few other plants that are sold like this, that are winter hardy, that are becoming invasive, and I won't go into all of them right now. But it's just really important to not dispose of them into natural areas. If you want to learn more about invasive plants, it is a really big conversation and it can be overwhelming even just to find out what's invasive to our area. I suggest that you look up the Canadian Coalition for Invasive plant regulation. They are doing a phenomenal job with education. And it's one of the things that I've been helping with Richie's as well, to create an invasive plant program. And as we were researching, like, there are so many different lists depending on where you are, but the Canadian Coalition for Invasive Plant Regulation, they actually follow the Auditor General's list. So it's a really, really great guide to follow. So when the goal is beginning to garden in a more environmentally friendly way, I'd like to break it down and make it a little more simple for you, depending on where you are on your journey of trying to garden in a more friendly way. So you can follow a good, better, best philosophy. So something that I would call good could be a non-invasive plant, which is better than, let's say, concrete or just lawn. So even hydrangeas, like the one pictured here, they're not from North America. We actually do have some native hydrangeas in North America, in the northern states, but most of our hydrangeas come from Japan and China. But it's not a known invasive. It doesn't have a whole lot of other benefits, but like I said, it's better than concrete. It's better than lawn. Even some of these non-invasive plants and bushes can help the soil retain and use rainwater instead of it running off the property as stormwater. It'll offer shelter for wildlife and at minimum sequester some atmospheric carbon and into the soil. A better situation would be to choose plants that originate from North America. So those especially that provide some benefit to pollinators and wildlife, like shelter, pollen, and nectar. This is a picture of a cultivated variety of echinacea. I believe this particular variety is called Magnus. The blooms haven't changed that much, so still seems to offer quite a bit of nectar for pollinators. And it's not native to our area, but it is native to some parts of Canada and North America. So that's a better situation than a plant that doesn't offer very much. But you know what I'm going to say, that the best situation, the best plants to make a difference would be the straight species of native plants that originated in your ecoregion. So they've evolved alongside the insects they support. There's generally a high degree of genetic diversity because they're not, they don't spread by clones. The seeds create a high degree of genetic diversity, and many native plants support even specialist insects that can only eat certain plants. Like most of us know about the relationship between monarch butterflies and milkweed. So these monarch butterflies are considered specialists because they've evolved only to eat milkweed. So, and sorry when I hesitate, I think it's just the way my screen is set up. I can't necessarily read everything on my screen. So I'm just trying to remember what I've written here. So I think the good news that I'm trying to share is that, especially if you are new on this journey and you're overwhelmed, you don't necessarily have to get rid of all your non-native plants to do better. So I would start by assessing your space, having a look at your space. You can take photos of plants that you don't know, share them with some of the Facebook groups. The horticultural societies have a great Facebook group, Master Gardeners of Ottawa, the Ottawa Wildflower Seed Library. I'll share their link at the bottom and some resources. These are all great places to help you identify plants. You can bring a professional in for a consultation. So assess your space, see what you have. And the first thing that you can do is just to prevent any further harm by identifying invasive plants and removing invasive plants. If you go as far as to add more native plants to your space, basically about 75% native plants in a space is enough to significantly improve benefits to local birds, native bees, and other wildlife. So I want to show you some of my thought process when I'm planning a space now that we've kind of covered, native plants and non-native and invasive. And I'll share a couple of plants that are my go-to as well, in a few more slides. But I just want to break down a bit of a process. Like, this is a very simplified process that I'm going to share with you, because I would much rather that you feel confident enough to at least start if you're creating a space or you'd like to rejuvenate a space. So I'll share some of my process. I chose this particular picture for a reason. This is just a stock photo from the internet, and it's a pretty garden picture, but I just want to point out that one of our problem plants, our invasive plants in North America and in Canada, is this bright red one here in the background, and that is an invasive barberry plant. Unfortunately, as much as we love these colors and textures in our gardens, in our area, there are no native plants that can give you that kind of a color all summer long. And again, that's part of the attraction to some of these problem plants. And of course, we're finding that this one is escaping into the wild. So I just wanted to point that one out to you. So as it relates to this slide, the photo itself of this little plan, I'm going to break that down into more detail over the next couple of slides. But I just want to encourage you that if you are looking to plan your space a little different, start with graph paper. Graph paper is awesome for helping you determine size and spacing of your plants. So you can plot out a plan on with graph paper, and then you use like each square as 1 foot, for example. That's what I generally do. And then what you would want to do is break up your space into different heights of plants. So for our example right here, I'm using 3 different layers: tall in the back, medium height in the middle, and then short plants at the front. You would want to give each plant, basically you want to know their height, their width, and then begin to fill in the blanks with appropriate size plants. Another thing I wanted to point out that I like to do is stagger the plants for maximum coverage. So if you look at the very back layer of plants, which are the tallest ones in the category that is like 4 to 6 feet, the plants that I would put directly in front of that, I don't put, or the row in front of that, I don't put the plants directly in front. I will actually put them off to the side first. So I'll plan the back row and then the next row of the larger plants. And I'll show you what I mean in the next few slides. I'll go deeper into that. But the other point that I want to mention as well, when you're planning out a space, if you have a large space and you're starting from scratch with some bushes and perennials, you can just plan a smaller chunk of space and then repeat that same pattern as you go. Even for smaller spaces, I find that if you have repeating flowers, repeating colors, it actually makes the space look larger. When you have one of this, one of this, one of this, and there's no continuity, it actually makes the space really busy and chops it up quite a bit. So if we were to look at a space like this one, and I gave it about 29 feet across the back, let's pretend that this is along a fence. So to start in the tallest area, if you want that layered effect, you could choose plants and bushes that might be 4 to 6 feet high. I would suggest bushes are a great option for your tallest layer if it's up against a fence. When you do add bushes, it does reduce your maintenance quite a bit as well. And then basically what I do, I will start with the first plant, give it a number, and then I start to create a legend or a plant list. And this can even be your shopping list. at the bottom. And then I basically, if I figure that if you want a plant to be about 6 feet high, or let's say 5 feet high, chances are it's going to be about the same width. So it's probably going to be 5 by 5. So you can estimate that that plant's going to grow 5 feet wide. So of course you're going to take up 5 squares. Not always the case, but it's a good rule of thumb. And if there are certain plants that you like, then you can just Google the sizes, the mature size. And here in Ottawa, I find that if you're given a size range for a plant, let's say if it was hydrangea limelight, it may say 4 to 6 feet. I find in Ottawa, because our winters are longer, that you may end up on the shorter end of that range. So maybe they'll only grow 4 to 5 feet in Ottawa, where in Toronto, they might grow to 6 feet. So start with the bushes. For a small space like this, if we choose bushes that just grow 5 feet wide, I'm just choosing 2 and I'm repeating them. So for number 1, as a non-native but non-harmful plant, you could go with hydrangea. For a native plant, you could choose gray dogwood or Spirea alba. And then we've got the quantity. So there's 2 for our shopping list. For an alternating bush, then I would generally choose something that has some different characteristics than the first one. So in this example, as a non-native option, maybe I would choose a Weigela wine and rose. Why I like that one is because it has a nicer burgundy color foliage. And if you are looking for something that could be a native version of about the same size of a plant, appropriate for a tall row in a garden, you could go with chokeberry or red osier dogwood. Moving on to the next layer, to get that next step, I would choose plants that are anywhere from 2 to 4 feet high. So when I'm laying out something like this to plan the space, I don't, unless I have a very specific list that I want to use, I don't even fill in the blanks of what type of plant that I'm going to use. I just know that I want maybe 3 different colors or 3 different bloom times in around that size. So maybe I'll pick one particular plant and then I'll go from there. So let's say, for example, number 3, in this case, I chose a snake root. I'm suggesting 2 to 6 of them. And the reason why 2 to 6, if I end up just not having too much space and it's only about 2 feet, then I will just have 1 on either side. But I have the option as well to choose a clump of 3 of them if I have a little bit more space. So that's why the 2 to 6. For number 4, I chose, for an example, a lanceleaf tickseed or lanceleaf coreopsis. I've done the same thing. I've kind of staggered them from the tall plant, and I could do a grouping of 3 or single ones. Depends on how fast I want that space to fill out as well, right? You can plant 3 of these plants like fairly close together. For the other plants, just to add some variety, different bloom time, I went with a hyssop for the middle one, number 5. Just chose one of those because it's a really big plant. And then as I went through this process, when I added a number 4, I didn't have a plant name in mind, but then I looked at the different colors that we have here and went, okay, well, I've got some summer color, I've got some late summer color, but I have nothing for spring. So for number 6, I thought, okay, well, what's a spring plant that's about 2 to 4 feet high? Did my research, and for that one, we could choose like a wild columbine. What else do I have there? A number 7, just wanted to add some different color. So again, I'm looking at the size and the height of the plant of what I need. Something a little different. I went for butterfly weed. That's a nice bright orange, and that'll help feed the monarch. So all the perennials that I'm suggesting here are native perennials. So moving on to the shortest section, you could just estimate it to be plants that will grow from the ground level, maybe up to 2 feet. So 0 to 2 feet. And again, I just chose 2 different plants, alternated them, and I'm suggesting clusters of them. So for number 8, I'm suggesting wild geranium, either 3 plants or 9, again, depending on how many of those I want to fill in. Maybe I do 3 individuals or 3 clusters of 3. And then to alternate and just give a different texture, I'm suggesting like a blue-eyed grass. And I'm suggesting 12 because I've got 4 different groups of them, and I would put 3 in each. So something that I should have mentioned as well, feel free to take pictures of any of the slides that I have here if it's helpful. So, I mean, like I said, this is not a comprehensive design course, but this could be a really good way for you to begin to figure out how to separate your space and identify areas to help you fill in that space. So I should also tell you that so I'm a self-taught garden designer. I've been in horticulture most of my life, well, all of my life, professionally for about 30 years. But oh my gosh, I made so many mistakes starting out, and I think we all do. So I'm all that to say, I'm not going to be somebody to judge you on what you would have in your garden. And I want to share some of the mistakes that I had first had done. Even after selling plants for many, many years, I still did some things that I would not do today. So this is probably, I'm going back about 15 years. So I've learned a lot since then, especially in the last 10 years. So my little garden space, I wanted to make some changes to it, add some texture. And some things that I did like that I did, I created these little nooks. I had a bench set in the side of the shed that had a view of the pond. I had a bird bath, a little sitting spot. So those things that I liked. But I want to show you like some of the things that are a part of this that I would never do now. Well, I inherited a weeping mulberry that is now known to be an invasive fruiting weeping mulberry. They do have sterile versions now, which is kind of nice that you can still purchase. I added invasive periwinkle. I added invasive lamium. The native plant that I added that I didn't know at the time was native was a trumpet vine. And if you've ever had a trumpet vine, these guys spread so well. They come up from the roots 10 feet away, and in a little space, you cannot have a native trumpet vine. And then the other thing I did, and tell me if you can relate to this, but I was impatient. So but I had a certain look in mind. So I created this path, and alongside of it, in a 1-foot space, I planted 10 boxwood. Boxwood will grow 4 to 5 feet or 3 to 4 feet, depending on the variety. Did all of those in a nice tidy row. So this space with the boxwood looked like that for probably about a year. Then they would have to be removed. So like I said, all of that to say, hopefully you can learn from some of my mistakes and don't do as I did. So now I want to move on to take those layers to another level, and I want to include the trees as well. So in the next couple of slides, I just want to share some examples of different trees, different shrubs, perennials, and ground cover that I would use. I'll probably go through these a little. I might skip through fairly quickly. So as I mentioned, if you want to take pictures of any of the particular plants, please do so. So I'm going to start off with trees. Some of the questions that I get quite often are about smaller trees for urban spaces. One of the, probably the most common design solution that I was helping with last year were trees for privacy, especially in the new home builds. If you've seen them, or if you live in a new home build, you'll know that the backyard is not very at all. So you really have to maximize your space. And then the other challenge with some of these smaller backyards are that the neighboring house is looking right down into your backyard, and then you're looking down into theirs from the top levels. So I got a lot of questions in the last year or two about how people can get some privacy as quick as they can. So I want to share a couple of different small trees with you, both native and non-native. From that picture, I will share what that tree was in just a second. So in these areas, people are looking for something that's fast growing, smaller size, like maybe under 20 feet, something that could be narrow. There are lots of different varieties now of evergreens and deciduous both. This particular one is a juniper, Wichita blue. Junipers generally aren't really massive trees, so fairly appropriate for spaces like this. And I mean, that blue is just incredible to add interest to your space. You can see how it's already starting to provide some privacy in this particular area, which is a new home built. I went to this homeowner's property. Our install team from Ritchie's had put these in about 4 years ago. And I was just amazed at how well they grew and established themselves. So that was 4 years of growth, and it's already at least 3 feet past a 6-foot high fence. So consider junipers if you have a challenging space like this. So this is a tree from the previous slide. In the same homeowner's backyard, this was a tree that I just fell in love with. It's the first time I saw this particular variety. And again, it was planted about 4 years ago. So this is a birch, and the variety is called Dakota Pinnacle. And you can see the size of it. It's double the fence. It probably would have been about 9 feet when it was planted, but now it's approaching probably 20 feet. So super fast grower for these kinds of situations. Fairly narrow tree and a fairly small tree for a birch. Generally, birch are closer to 40 and more feet. So this one only gets 30 feet high by 10 feet wide. So sometimes the breeders do some good things and help us solve these problems by creating these plants that can fit in these kinds of spaces. The thing about birch, which are great as well, is that they can handle a lot of extra moisture. So in some of these backyards, especially the new home builds, in between the properties, you'll have like this swale that goes between the row of homes to accommodate for stormwater. So this is a tree that could be planted fairly close to that swale. If it takes a long time to drain after a heavy storm, they won't have a problem with that. Another tall, narrow evergreen that can also handle extra moisture is a cedar that grows fairly narrow and tall. So this particular cedar is called a DeGroot spire cedar, and we use that a lot to act as like a sentinel for an entryway. Cedars have shallow root systems, so they're not as much of a problem planted a few feet away from the foundation. Another evergreen, again, that I just want to share with you because I've learned about a lot of these varieties in the past few years. This is a variety of a white spruce. This one is called Montrose Charm, and there's a couple of other different varieties now that grow the same way. So very column-like, very narrow. They can get 20 to 30 feet tall, which is probably about half the size of a native spruce tree, but they only grow 6 to 8 feet wide. So again, another very column shape, very narrow, maximize your space, extremely hardy, and fairly drought tolerant once established as well. So I want to share a couple of native smaller trees that I like to use. Excuse me. So if you've been looking and researching native trees, I'm sure you will come across serviceberry. There's a couple of different ones that are native to our area. There have been some that have been bred for different characteristics as well. But serviceberry is a beautiful native plant, gorgeous fall color. It's very valuable as a host plant for a wide range of wildlife. Very early spring flowers, which is a really important source of nectar and pollen for the early part of the season. Small tree in the landscape, sweet edible berries, favorite for numerous birds. There's a couple of different photos. The one in flower, that would definitely be a cultivated variety that's been bred for more flowers, dense, compact habit. And another native plant that I like to use in the space of a small tree is a pagoda dogwood. It gets its name pagoda from the layers, very horizontal layers of branches. They can also take a lot of moisture. They'd actually prefer shade, and it is a wonderful host plant for many butterflies and moths. And the flowers are a great source of food for pollinators as well. And if you've got extra large space and you can plant an oak, that would be an amazing situation. If you don't want to bother with a garden, but you want to do something with wildlife, plant a native oak tree. They support over 500 species of moths and butterflies and many more birds and small animals. Dr. Doug Tallamy actually has a book dedicated just to native oak trees called The Nature of Oaks. So next I want to just cover off a couple of shrubs as well. And I think all of the ones that I'm going to show you here are native shrubs that we can use instead of some of the invasive ones that are becoming really real problems. So when you're considering shrubs, like if like our little sample of a rough plan that I shared with you is a good way for you to start. Something else that you can do when it comes to shrubs is you can use your fence panels to divide up your space, and you can even just put one shrub right in the middle of that to help separate that space. They'll definitely add structure and texture to a garden, reduce the workload. They can become a shelter and habitat for birds. Shrubs are going to offer shade to other plants from the scorching heat that are lower than them, and they'll act as a windbreak as well, which can be really important, especially in situations like the weather that we've had last night. So consider shrubs as a windbreak for snow drifts, if that's a concern in your space. Another family of native shrubs that are really, really nice in the landscape use are high bush cranberries. They generally grow anywhere from 8 to 15 feet tall. I would like to encourage you to reduce your workload. So I wouldn't want you to have to pick a plant that's too big for your space, but I will tell you that these guys take really well to trimming. If it was something that you loved and you only wanted it to get to 6 feet high, 7 feet high. Gorgeous white flowers in the fruit that you see on here is a great late winter food source for birds and wildlife. Another plant in the same family of viburnum is called a nannyberry, another beautiful native plant with gorgeous fall foliage that does really well in a landscape situation. This has got to be my favorite native bush, winterberry. It is our native version of what you've probably seen as Christmas holly with the leaves. Ours is deciduous. It drops its leaves over the winter, but it has these beautiful, beautiful berries that stay on for most of the winter. If it is something that you like to add to your space, it's just good for you to know that you do need a male and a female to produce berries. Some of the growers now are getting smart and adding 2 plants in one pot so that you could plant them together. They naturally grow in areas that are fairly swampy, but they can handle dry situations once established. So again, another great plant for the landscape. And chokeberry is quickly becoming one of my favorite native bushes again. Back in the drawing, I realized that I had a spelling mistake there, so I'm not judging you and your periwinkle, so please don't judge me on my spelling mistakes. I'll catch them. I just get them later. But chokeberry, a nice small little shrub with gorgeous fall color. And that's something that we tend to look for when we're buying plants and planting plants for our spaces. So in that respect, it is a really great replacement for burning bush. Burning bush is now a known invasive species in North America. We do have burning bush growing wild in Gatineau Park now. That's spreading. And unfortunately, by the time we start to see these plants get away from us, it's actually almost too late to manage them, or it becomes quite time consuming and expensive to start managing them. But chokeberry is a great alternative. So that's something that I've been doing as a designer, where we would normally use something that's invasive in the landscape. I'm looking for all of these substitutions that check all the same boxes as a problematic plant that we can substitute for a native one. So something that's good to know about the native varieties of or the native species of chokeberry is that they do spread fairly well by suckers. So it really is a great situation or solution for erosion control on a slope, if that's an issue that you have. And the cultivated varieties have been cultivated to not sucker and spread the same. So if you like this shrub and want to add it to your landscape, that's just something good to know. So I'll go through the next couple of slides fairly quickly. I want to just share a couple of different perennials, native perennials that you might want to consider adding. These are less of a commitment than trees and bushes. You can add some perennials, and if for some reason it's not the right thing, you don't like it or how it grows, you can re-gift that and start with something else. So I would just encourage you to try to add a few native perennials and ground covers to your space. So I'll share just a couple of my favorite ones. Black-eyed Susan is probably one of my favorite ones for sure. It's a host plant for 14 species of butterflies and moths. It's a great source of seeds for winter birds. Because we're learning not to be as clean in the garden. We try to leave up our perennials to support wildlife, whether it's habitat by native bees overwintering in the stems or for seeds for birds through the winter. Very long blooming season, this guy. It can take full sun or part shade. Once established, really drought resistant. That's not a great picture there, but I really wanted to show you this picture just to show you how long into the season it can bloom for. So this I did find in the wild, of course, had a bee on it, so it had to be photographed. But you can see in the background the fall colors. So this was well into October that it was still flowering, and they start flowering in June. So, but this is a better picture to show the plant habit, how it grows. And I feel I took this is just a stock photo from the internet, but I feel that this coloring is a little off. That's a little brighter yellow than what it actually is. The previous picture shows more of the true color, but this shows the size and shape of the plant and how wide it spreads. Another favorite of mine, butterfly weed. It is one of the native milkweeds, which is a host plant for the monarch caterpillar. They've evolved to only be able to eat milkweeds, so they're really, really important for this threatened species. And you might be surprised to know that there's actually 11 different species of milkweed that are native to Ontario. Something else cool that I found out about them, the seeds have this fluff attached to them, and even that fluff is used for nesting materials for birds. And two of the species that I find very striking and that do really well in a landscape situation and in an ornamental garden are the swamp milkweed, the pink one. As its name suggests, it can handle moist environments, and that's generally where we'll see it in the wild. But again, once you've established it and established the root zone, it can dry out, which is a really great thing to have in a plant. The one on the right-hand side is butterfly weed. It's a much shorter milkweed, a very striking bright orange, almost like waxy petals. It's a really, really tough, strong performing plant. And it differs in the swamp milkweed in that it doesn't like wet feet. So it prefers a drier environment. So if you picture like that hot spot in your garden that nothing will grow in, consider the orange butterfly weed. Lance leaf coreopsis. So this one, show you another picture too that was that I had taken at a property. This is a really, again, strong performer, very drought tolerant, deer resistant. It self-seeds readily. So it's a really good option if you're trying to create a wildflower meadow, really long bloom time as well. So this was a picture of a space that I was helping maintain, and my jaw dropped the first time that I drove up and saw this at the beginning of June. It's just a huge, huge meadow. And this was probably about mid-June, I think. They kept flowering right up until August. But as soon as we got into July, then the purple coneflower in this meadow started to show, and it was just incredibly striking. Purple coneflower. Again, as I mentioned before, that it is a native to North America, but it, again, just as a strong performing plant, heat tolerant, drought tolerant, really great source of nectar for pollen and bees, for butterflies and other pollinators. There are a lot of cultivars available, but the native ones, as we talked about earlier, are definitely best for wildlife. And another favorite one, this isn't so common out there, but this is a obedient plant. It is a wonderful native plant, again, because it checks off so many boxes for me. It can take full sun to part shade, blooms later in the summer. Naturally, they will grow in a swampy area. So it is really perfect for a rain garden. Rain gardens may stay wet for up to 2 days, but then they may go through the other extreme and be extremely dry for weeks on end. So this is a plant that can fit that kind of condition. It spreads easily by seed as well as underground rhizomes. It is a member of the mint family, excuse my typo. So if you know about mint, mint are very enthusiastic spreaders. So best to keep it contained or give it space to spread. And this was one that I saw late summer. Oh, this is probably actually fall when it was flowering like this. This was in a little urban spot in the glebe. I am generally not a big fan of using river rock because it heats up so much and they can bake the roots. But I guess it was a perfect way to contain this obedient plant. And the name, it gets its name obedient plant from, I guess if you were to twist the flower stem, it stays the same. It's not because it's a nice tidy plant in the garden. It will grow large. And ground covers, I'll quickly cover some ground covers and then we'll leave some time for some questions. I might just go a little bit past 8 o'clock, but I'm almost finished. I did want to show you this photo right here. Generally, when people ask me what they can plant under their trees, they say, I've tried hosta, I've tried this, I've tried this, I've tried this, and nothing will grow. Usually I'll tell them, well, there's your answer, nothing will grow. For most conditions in an ornamental landscape, it's actually not a good idea to plant a lot of plants under large trees that are going to shade it, take up all the nutrients, take up all the water. But if you're lucky enough to have a space with like taller trees where the branches are up quite high and you leave those leaves every year to build up organic matter, then you could have a situation like this right here in this picture, where you have some spring flowering plants that'll take advantage of the open canopy cover before the leaves fill out. And right here are about a mix of 4 different plants that are growing really well in that rich humus that's been created by all the leaf litter. So the blue are Virginia bells, the yellow should be primrose, wild primrose, evening primrose. And I also see some May apples and wild ginger and bloodroot in here as well. But the key would be to create all that organic matter in that kind of a situation. I hadn't planned on breaking all that down for you. It's just a pretty picture, but it's a gorgeous picture. And I would love to have that space. So I thought I would just share a few of those with you. So I won't go through the detail on these right here. I'll just name them for you as options for ground cover to replace some of the problematic invasive ones. Wild strawberry, you're not going to find that easily at garden centers, but chances are if you have not been spraying your lawn with any pesticides or weed killers, you probably have it coming up in your lawn. So it is a great plant to encourage as a native plant to have as a ground cover to help prevent weeds in your garden. Another great native ground cover is barren strawberry. I think this is now becoming my go-to because I have been able to find it quite easily at garden centers for the most part, especially in the spring. Foam flower, tiarella. I showed you this picture that's not really attractive, just to show you that by the end of the summer, you know, how critters have been eating the leaves. So it is providing a valuable resource for some of them. It does have really pretty white flowers in the spring as well. And that's just a different photo in one of my other woods that I go to and walk on the trails. And it spreads really, really, really nicely, and a great one for shade. And I think this is the last one that I have to show you. Wild ginger, another really great shade-loving ground cover. It spreads a little slower than some of the other ones. And I just wanted to share some other resources with you. So if you have not heard of this website, it's called Vascan Canadensis. When I'm helping to order plants for our garden center, or we're trying to highlight a plant, I'll always check it in here first in the Vascan resource to see where it is native to. So Vascan Canadensis, you can look up many of our ornamental plants and native plants in here, and it'll tell you if it's been introduced or if it is a straight native to our area. And just to finish up, like some of the benefits of gardening with nature, I could riddle off a bunch, but honestly, to me, the biggest benefit is to see our younger generation interacting with all of the amazing wildlife that comes when you garden in an environmentally friendly way. These are all my grandkids on their property. They're lucky enough to have a pond, so they get turtles. And no, they don't pick up the turtles anymore, but we taught them that. But it's just really amazing to see young people how much they're fascinated by nature and critters. And it really is our job to encourage that natural curiosity, because these are the people that are going to be ruling the world, and we're leaving them a world that needs some improvement, I feel. Oh, and another benefit of nature, like one day you might just be out looking at the asters and you come across an insect that you've never seen before and realize that you've never seen a yellow spider before. And then you go down a rabbit hole and realize that it's called a goldenrod spider. And then maybe 5 years later, a coworker of yours sends you a picture of a pink spider, and then your mind is blown a little bit. And then you realize it's the same spider. Just the fact that crab spiders can change colors. You learn all these fascinating things, and this is what happens as soon as you plant native plants. You get these creatures coming into your life. So I will just use the words of the late great Maya Angelou, just to remind you that to do the best you can until you know better. When you know better, do better. And that's the journey that I have been on. And I've got a couple of slides here on where to buy native plants. So definitely the garden centers, they are getting better at sourcing native plants with the demand. So thank you to everybody who has been asking for the garden centers to to bring them native plants. As I mentioned earlier, this industry is changing, and it's a massive change, but it's going to take time for the horticultural industry to keep up with the demand. If you do go to your local garden center or your box stores as well, because you get great prices at box stores, you really need to go in armed with some information, because a lot of the growers aren't great at identifying native plants or separating them. So you really need to go with your VASCAN tab open on your phone to check to see that they are indeed native to your area, if that's what you're looking for. I mentioned that I'm at Richie's Feed and Seed in the East location, so we've been expanding our native plants. Fletcher Wildlife Gardens usually do a spring sale. Ontario Native Plants is an online resource with a really, really great reputation and credibility. Beaux Arbres, previously of Quebec, is now in Eganville. A Cultivated Art, this is Sandura Alpha Pervez. She grows a ton of native plants in her backyard space. So I would encourage you to check out her website to see what she has coming up when. She has been incredibly generous with her information and her knowledge. So she has a ton of educational materials, including videos on her website. Nature Aid is also a grower, local grower. He's based out of Winchester, and he also does ecological landscape design and installation. Connaught Nurseries in Cobden, Trinkets in Time in Embrun, Ferguson Tree Nursery in Kemptville. These are all specialists in native plants. So these are your go-to people for credibility for sure. Couple of other resources. I know I mentioned the Ottawa Wildflower Seed Library, very active on Facebook. They have been mailing thousands and thousands and thousands of seeds out to people for free at no charge. Rewild Landscapes, another eco-friendly designer and installer. Canadian Wildlife Federation has amazing resources on their website. And I mentioned Doug Tellamy. So check out his website and all the resources they have. For another local person, Barrett Erickson, I've watched some of her webinars, a ton of amazing information that she does, and she supports her work through or promotes her work through Corner Pollinator Garden. And Sean James is the last one that I'll mention. He's another person that I follow for all of his wonderful knowledge. He's based out of Hamilton. He does consulting, rain gardens, native plant garden specialist. And I have to say that he's done a really good job with educating the landscaping industry as it relates to native plants. And if you didn't know, the Canadian Wildlife Federation, they do have a native garden display in Canada, and they will host tours out there. And you can have your garden certified as a wildlife-friendly habitat through their certification process. So I would love to invite you to connect with me if I can help you in any way in your desire to garden in a more environmentally friendly way. We'll take some time if anybody has any questions. And what I'll do is I'll just leave my contact information here on the as a last slide. You can reach out to me through Facebook, through the Fine Gardener, but I've also left my email information right here and my phone number. If we don't get to all your questions, feel free to send me an email with your questions. I'll probably be more responsive to email than direct phone calls. I get a lot of spam because it's a business number, so I don't always pick up, especially in the wintertime. So I will turn it back to Joanne, I guess, or somebody else to see if anybody has input any questions that I can help with.
Lana, thank you so much. This has been, you're a wealth of information. And, you know, it really shows us the importance of balancing the biodiversity with also still being able to maintain like an aesthetic look for our gardens, because I think we really do want our gardens to look great. Now there's before we get to the questions, I just want to say that during these cold months, this is the perfect time of year for, I think, all of us to start considering that our gardens worked hard for us last year. And so it's a really good time to take in all this resourceful information that you've shared with us tonight and do our own research and assess our gardens and to really put it into application starting only a few months away from now in the spring. So thank you very much for that. So we do have a few questions. And so I'd like to just maybe go ahead and we can deal with a few already.
Yeah.
So somebody is asking, you mentioned garden centers. So somebody is asking, how can we convince garden centers to maybe stop selling invasive species plants?
Mhm. And it's a question that I am so excited to talk about. I have a soft spot for garden centers. That's where I've spent my career. So I see how I see many of the challenges that they face. It's one of those areas, like, as gardeners, like, we're a demanding group. And come May, we want everything open, ready. We want our plants, we want our flowers, we want our veggies. And they have to hire up so fast for just like the period of like a month, 60 days, let's say. So they have some challenges. A lot of people who own the garden centers, like, they're not necessarily, they hire horticulturalists. The owners themselves don't always get into the nitty gritty of the things that hort societies do and gardeners do. So it can be a little slow at first for them to get their head around the problem. Followed the Canadian Coalition for Invasive Plant Species Regulation. They're doing a ton of work to have invasive species banned. I think that would be the first. I think that's where the source is, because you've got such a wide range of different people selling plants. You've got box stores, you've got family-owned garden centers, and the family-owned garden centers are still reeling from COVID. All their logistics changed. They're trying to keep their prices low while all their expenses have gone high. So it can be a really daunting thing for them to even learn and know as much as what many of us do when as it relates to the problems with invasive species. I just wish they weren't available. I just wish they didn't have the freedom. I wish the decision was not theirs, because they're trying to keep a lot of different people happy. So I know that with the Canadian Coalition, they've been encouraging people to send letters to your garden centers, to the managers, to the owners. I know that for Richie's, like, one of the things that's been really inspiring is every time that people have, like, at first I wanted them to increase the native plants so that they could see, the demand and, how the industry is changing. And so anytime that on social media, those things are supported with all these local garden centers, it really means a lot. And just sharing that, that's what your desire is. So just, there's a lot of people that are doing that, whether it's social media, sending letters, just keep doing that. And lobby for them to be banned in the first place. Like, it's just so ridiculous to me that we have all of these plants that are creating millions of dollars in expenses to eradicate them that are still being sold. So I'm with you. I understand it. And if you read through the website and the white pages from the Canadian Coalition for Invasive Plant Regulation, they'll share all the stats and the facts, and they also go into a deeper dive as to why that's not happening on a governmental level. For governments, they've got a lot of different crises that they're dealing with, so it becomes a triage situation. So it's not an easy, quick thing to do. And again, as I mentioned, the industry is going through this massive change. And now that we're knowing that invasive plants are so problematic, the rest of the industry and the government agencies that should be having these plants banned altogether, they're just not catching up quick enough.
Exactly. The work that you're doing, Lana, is, I think it's really important, sharing your knowledge and the education. And I love what you were saying about, you mentioned even those photos of the grandchildren and getting acquainted and encouraging their natural curiosity. I think maybe there's a role for horticultural societies, master gardeners, to continue their work within the communities and, perhaps within the schools and that type of thing. So that's maybe something that we can all keep in mind too. So now I'm just checking again for any other questions. So I'm encouraging folks to type in their comments, questions, if you have any. Let me just ask you one thing. Are you finding within this Ottawa region and the work that you're doing, are you finding different pockets of themes, of challenges that you see in different parts of the region? You mentioned, the architecture and your design work will obviously depend on the, whether it's a boggy area and so on. But
Yeah.
are you seeing a real trend in that area?
Yeah, thank you for that question. And if I understand you right, like, are there different geographical, like, are there different challenges geographically, like what one community might be dealing with as a
Yeah,
unique situation? Yep.
right. Yes.
So I'm based out of Orleans, and before I came here, I was in CARP for 2 years. So I got to know the challenges of like some of these rural properties, and being able to plant larger trees and whatnot has been a benefit for them. And that's been a nice thing until the derecos and the tornadoes hit. So different pockets around the area definitely have issues with trees coming down. So people are definitely looking at the type of trees that they're putting back up. We need our canopy covers. So people do want to put back trees for many different reasons. So maybe just looking at the types of trees that they're planting that maybe have a deeper root system, that type of thing. I found in these rural areas as well, there's a different type of pest issue that you have in the way of deer. So many more deer out there. So we really have to be cognizant of planting plants that they don't eat. Funny enough, in the south end of Ottawa, Barrhaven, Manotick, they're overrun there with rabbits. So in the south end, you really got to protect your shrubs and trees from rabbit damage there. Also, I find in the south end, because we're higher there, like closer to the airport, the airport was built on the highest spot in Ottawa. And there are plants that you can't necessarily grow there that will do well and thrive compared to, let's say, closer to the valley and in these microclimates such as the glebe. So we can now grow Japanese maples, for example, in Ottawa, but they'll do much better in these protected microclimates of the city center with all that extra heat than they will in a more exposed south end, close to Manotick, Barrhaven, and around the airport. And other than that, just what I'd mentioned earlier with the new housing developments, where that creates a different dilemma in itself for privacy issues and just being able to soften that sterile square piece of lawn in your backyard. And if there are anybody still watching that has any other questions related to anything that I've mentioned or any gardening questions, like I said, just don't hesitate to reach out to me at my email. It can be a little tricky if you signed in just directly from the link instead of going to YouTube first. So you may have questions, and hopefully you're not frustrated by trying to type them in. But I'm happy to answer questions over the next few days.
I think what we'll do is we'll take one final question. We have some folks that are commenting on the large oak trees and how they're dropping acorns like rain. And
Yeah.
I know that in my case too, I live out in a rural area, and I don't know if it was, did you hear any issues that this was being reported this year where the trees being stressed? And I don't know what you'd recommend on that, but it was loud.
So they go through, okay, so you have a personal experience with this. When did you notice the
Well, you know, we start losing the acorns usually in about August, September.
Okay,
This year it began much earlier.
yeah. So oak trees as well as fruit trees, they go through every couple of years, they'll have a year that they call a mast year. And during a mast year, the production of fruit is much higher than other years. So I hadn't been tuned into the oak community to notice if there was an extra lot of acorns this year, but it sounds like there has been. And there's a lot of different factors that could affect these years. But again, it's just something about the mystery of nature sometimes and how nature does these things. But very similar with fruit trees. If you've had fruit trees, you may see that you'll go through a couple of lean years and all of a sudden you get a bumper crop. So very similar with oak trees.
Okay.
And there could be a lot of different factors that affect it. It could usually, it can happen. I've noticed when we have an extra dry year, sometimes the following year becomes a mast year or a bumper crop for fruit production. But I wouldn't be able to go into all the details because I just follow it like on a superficial way. So I don't get into the science of what creates the mast years, but it is pretty common. We may have another one again in about another 3 to 5 years.
Okay. I think that's really good to know, especially if people are considering to plant that within their landscape and architecture.
Yeah, for sure.
Thank you very much,
All
Lana.
right, so welcome.
And so as we're running out of time and we don't want to keep anybody longer than we should, but I want to say thank you very much for the wealth of information that you shared with us tonight, your enthusiasm, and also the hope that this is, you know, a wonderful, not only just a pastime, but we're doing this as stewards of our nature and our community. So thank you very much. And we want to also remind folks, Julianne mentioned at the beginning of the evening that stay tuned for our next talk, which is going to be really interesting in February. You won't want to miss it. It's growing organic vegetables. And yes, during the cold months, you might be a little surprised. So stay tuned for that. Come back and learn and grow with us on February 25th. Thanks very much, everyone, and